Jeff Akin, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks, John. It's really great to be here. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Portland, Oregon. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about teaching leadership through Star Trek and pop culture. And we were just having a fun conversation in the pre-interview. It turns out we both grew up in Salem, Oregon.
Right.
We graduated a couple years apart from each other. We went to kind of the rival high schools in Salem, which anyways, it's just fun, a small world. And I was also mentioning how fun I think it is that you do all of this in your own podcast and you teach leadership through Star Trek and pop culture. I've always dreamed of teaching a university class that was all based on, instead of having all the readings that we just watch movies and video clips from TV shows and such to illustrate everything. And that's what you do every day. So that's fantastic. As we get started, I wanted to share Jeff's bio with everybody. Jeff Akin is a 20-year veteran of the public and private sectors. He has extensive experience in both media and entertainment, as well as over 2 decades in management and leadership. Jeff specializes in listening to others, helping them unleash their true potential, and giving feedback that is authentic yet kind. I think that's a great way of framing that. Anything else, Jeff, that you would like to share with me or my audience before we dive on into the conversation?
Well, and as we'll come out through the conversation, I'm a huge nerd and I love Star Trek. And I think that's fine, right? I mean, Nowadays, when you and I grew up in the mean streets of Salem, as it were, like it wasn't so cool to be a nerd, but I feel like I helped pave the road for everyone today.
Yeah, and I don't know what your preferred Star Trek element is. Star Trek The Next Generation, early to mid 90s, that was like the bread and butter for me. That's still, when my wife and I want to watch old episodes of Star Trek, we turn on Star Trek The Next Generation.
It's totally
that
the
makes
comfort. It's like the comfort,
a comfort
Star
thing.
Trek.
Yeah. So that's makes me a bit nerdy as well. But I just recently, there's that new the new movie series that came out with Chris Pine. And I know people have different feelings about that series. But I was just introducing some of my older children to that just, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, because they know culturally about Star Trek a little bit, but they'd never really seen any movies or anything. So anyways, kind of fun. And as we were talking in the pre-interview, there's just so many lessons, whether it's Star Trek, whether we're talking about pop culture in general, or there's other movies, other TV shows. There's so many great ways that we can learn leadership principles, and that's through popular culture and media. It's a way that resonates with a lot of people, and perhaps we can connect with people in a way that's a little different than the traditional modes. So I think it's fantastic that you take this approach. So let's start with the why behind this. Why do you teach leadership through Star Trek and pop culture? What really got you into this space?
Well, as a manager, right? Like I've been working as a manager for a long time. I like to joke that if I had any real skills, I'd have a real job, but I don't. So I'm a manager and it works. But I felt like my real job was to develop and create other managers and leaders. I believe managers and leaders are different things, right? It's a different skill set, but I think that everything jives best when you can kind of get some synergy. There's one of those fun buzzwords, but synergy between the two. But I was always struggling to get, I'll say, younger or inexperienced managers excited about leadership. Hey, read this book, right? Go watch this TED Talk. And there's great stuff in there. But I mean, let's be honest, a lot of it's pretty dry and boring at best. And it's just a lot of facts and a lot of lists and stuff. And I had one day when I was really frustrated in a meeting. You've probably actually been in this meeting before, John, where they're talking about something and they're asking a question, and in your head, you're like, didn't we already make a decision on this? Like, why are we talking about it? We had action items. Like, what's going on? And I was in like my 5th one of these in a row, and I just got really frustrated. And I literally, I raised my hand and I was like, hey, can we have meetings like Captain Kirk has meetings? You know what I mean? Like issue, discussion, decision, and action. Boom. And that's when the light went off for me. And I realized that unintentionally, I'd been learning leadership my whole life watching Star Trek. And so I went home, I watched some Star Trek, which is, I mean, that's just a pretty universally applicable statement. But I watched it and I just started thinking, like, what else is in here? What else can I learn? And it is endless. you can learn. I mean, there's having difficult conversations, there's running a meeting, there's talking about a toxic work environment and what to do about those things. And so I flipped my script and I stopped handing people the great books to read, and I started telling them to go watch TV shows. And I have just seen incredible growth in the people that I work with. Things just click for them a little bit better. And I feel like now my magic touch is telling them which episode to go watch, right? Like, oh, it's a really good problem you're having there. In the Voyager episode Rise, there's a really good example of how they need to have an authentic conversation and how to do it. Why don't you go watch that and let's talk through it. And immediately, like, awesome things happen.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And it does just connect with people in a different way, doesn't it?
It really does.
And there's lots of great books out there. I like to think of myself as an author, a researcher. I've written a lot. I would like to think that the stuff I've written is valuable and that it helps people. But the reality is it's just different. And different people really prefer different modalities of taking in their information and thinking through it and how to apply it. And so this is just another great way. As I mentioned, I would love to teach a class where this is just kind of what I do. I've never really gotten there, but I do find myself probably almost weekly in class where I'll just tell my students, hey, informal extra credit, like, go check out this, because we're talking about whatever concept. Go check out this movie. This is a really great depiction. Or go check out this TV show or this episode or whatever, like you were just saying. And I haven't formally integrated it into the course, but it comes up repeatedly as I'm talking about concepts and issues. And then I get students coming back, and sometimes I'm dating myself, right? Because I'm referencing something that they've never even heard of, or from whatever. Sometimes I am a little bit more up to date in my pop culture references, but regardless, if they go and they watch it and then they come back, then there's so many great conversations that come from that, and a lot of really good application that can come from it. So I think that's fantastic, and I know that this is what you approach, not only in your trainings, the work that you do, but with your podcast. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I host a podcast called the Starfleet Leadership Academy, and it's just me. It's just me talking, right? But I have a long background in broadcasting. I actually worked in professional wrestling for about 20 years, up until COVID really changed the game, and it shifted me from wrestling to podcasting, which, John, isn't really that they're not that different from each other. A lot less violent. Like my orthopedic surgeon's a lot happier with me now that I sit behind a mic all the time. But I've crafted a podcast where I watch an episode of Star Trek and I break it down, but it's not boring, right? I think for me, I don't want it to be a Star Trek podcast, and I don't want it to just be a leadership podcast. In fact, when I started thinking about doing one, I wanted to do a leadership podcast first. And so I go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever, and I'm like, gosh, there are so many leadership podcasts out there, so many great ones, out there. And I mean, I don't know if I have anything new to offer in that space. It's pretty saturated. Well, hey, I love Star Trek. Let me do, oh, wow, that is really saturated. There's a whole lot more, and yikes, we're good. I think we're good. And I gave up on the idea until I had that epiphany with the meeting a little while ago. And I was like, I can talk about leadership through Star Trek. And there was nothing I could find doing this. And so I give a little recap of the Star Trek episode, because not everyone that listens is a Star Trek fan. And then my fun part, I get to talk about, like, hey, this is an awesome episode. I loved it for this. Or, hey, if you watched this, God bless you. Like, this is, yeah. There's over 800 episodes of Star Trek out there right now. There are some stinkers in that mix. But then I break down the leadership concepts, right? So I'll talk about things that are really specific, like, instead of saying no, say yes if, right? And identify your constraints. Or I'll talk about a project management piece, or I'll break down part of Lean or Six Sigma, process improvement kind of a concept. The topics have been endless. I started the podcast in early 2020 after we responded to the pandemic, and I was like, I really hope I'm not doing the same podcast every time, right? Or I really hope I don't run into an episode that has nothing in it. And I have had such a wide variety of things to talk about. And even like I'll watch the episode the first time and I'll look at my wife and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to talk about in this one. And then I'll start writing. You know, I'd watch it a second time and I write and I take notes. And every time I'm like, oh, there's something awesome here, especially in the original series with Kirk. Sometimes it'll be like this 5-second interaction on the bridge where he does a thing or says a thing. And I'm like, let's talk about all the things that went into this moment and why he was able to have this awesome interaction with his yeoman that, you know, normally you wouldn't see or anything. But no, I try to make it fun and relatable. Leadership. I have a good friend. His name is John Rennie. He's got a podcast called Deep Leadership. It's excellent. But he says that leadership is a people business. Yeah, 100%. And when you're working with people, like people are cool. People are fun. Why do we have to make it so stodgy, you know, and like so formalized? And I think that through the format that I've created, I can make it fun. I can make it kind of silly and sometimes stupid, you know, but in ways that like it makes lights go off for people. We're like, oh yeah, this is great. I love hearing from people where they're like, hey, I watched, you know, listen to this episode and then I went and watched the Star Trek episode. Then I did it. Here's what happened. It's like, oh, look at this. We're making a difference out in the world. And it's just, I don't know. I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And while I'm not sure I've ever specifically referenced Star Trek movies or episodes in my trainings or my classes. One that I have, which is sci-fi, is the Ender's Game series. So even before they ever came out with the movie, whenever that was, 5+ years ago, I've always loved those books. And so it's been a series that I've referenced often. And I've even presented at a couple academic conferences where leadership principles from Ender's Game. That's been kind of fun. And then the movie came out, and that made it a little bit more accessible to the average person, and that's fun. So, anyways, just to reiterate, look for leadership lessons anywhere, right?
I've done
for anyone listening.
I do extra bonus episodes. Like I have a Patreon, right? You know, and so I'll put bonus. There's a fun British show called the IT Crowd or the IT Crowd, you know, about some tech support guys in the basement. I've done leadership deep dives on that show. I've done leadership deep dives on Star Wars, you know, of course, the Orville, you know, it's really in like that sci-fi space. But one of my favorite ones I ever did was My Little Pony. There's an episode like here's my freebie for everybody. Go watch season 6 episode 10 of My Little Pony. It's called Applejack's Big Day or something. It's a 23-minute long episode. Right. It's a master class in Lean and Six Sigma. It's just I have never seen it explained more simply and applicably than in this My Little Pony show.
I'll have to go ask my little kids, because I know I have a couple daughters that have really loved My Little Pony. So yeah. I'll have to ask them about that one.
That's all I got exposed. Good. Yeah, my daughter loves it. And it was on the background and I heard it. I'm just like, oh, what is this? Let's watch this one again.
That's super fun. And those shows like Star Trek, like the Orville, like Star Wars and many others, one of the messages that comes out repeatedly for me as I'm watching them is inclusion. And of course, we're talking about kind of this utopian future, right? Where we've come together as a human race to leverage our capacities and our differences and our capabilities to be able to, live life in such a way that we can actually go explore the stars, right? Like we're not being held down by our petty differences and war and all that kind of stuff in this futuristic kind of story. And it's really great. And they go explore and they interact with other cultures. And it comes up so often in so many episodes where there's just this wrestle, right? Between, respecting and honoring this culture that they're encountering on some planet somewhere in the universe, versus kind of their own sensibilities and trying to find a way to just be inclusive. And I think that's a message that we just need to hear over and over and over again in a variety of different ways. And I know that's one you talk about a lot too. So I'm wondering now, if we pivot a little bit and maybe spend in the next little bit of time together, what are some of those the measurable outcomes that can come from fostering inclusion in a welcoming work environment? And are there any examples that pop into your mind from Star Trek that help to illustrate that?
One of the foundations of Star Trek, of Gene Roddenberry's vision for it, is called the IDIC, or Infinite Diversity and Infinite Combinations. And I think like that's kind of the ultimate leadership principle. When we can embrace everything, I feel like there's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that they're alphabetical for a reason, right? You start with diversity so you can build equity, so you can achieve inclusion. Diversity is a checkbox, right? Inclusion is action. And in one of the programs one of the things I think is unique about me as a teacher in this space is I'm not just a full-time coach. Like, I'm actually a full-time manager who still works. I'm in the trenches. And I think that allows me to, really put my practice into practice in a real way. And also I love doing the work. But in order for me to put that into operation, the IDIC principle, I worked with local, programs that help support people with disabilities, specifically people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and helping them to compete equitably for employment, with dignity, with benefits, with great paid, things like that. And so we've really focused on building that pipeline. And when I initially went into this process, I got a lot of flack from my colleagues, other executives around the organization, who were just like, hey, this isn't a charity organization. We have business to take care of, or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing this for charity. One, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, right? We preach equity all the time. Heck, we have a policy that says we're an anti-racist organization, which is awesome. Let me put that into practice a little bit. But I'm also doing it because of the measurable outcomes. So what I have now is I have a lower head count than I had prior to building this pipeline. And that's not a negative, right? It's not that I've gone and laid people off or anything. Through attrition, people have promoted, and we just haven't had to fill, because I have skilled workers that want to be there and are part of a valuable team that enjoy learning new skills and applying them. Because we've created an environment where people, regardless of their ethnicity, their religious background, gender, disability status, anything, can come and really just be themselves. They want to be there. And what's amazing, when people want to be somewhere, they tend to perform really, really well. And so I'm producing more. It's costing me less money to do it. From an HR standpoint, we have almost zero disciplinary situations going on. Just the what I call the babysitting work of management is almost non-existent. Or when it does exist, it's a value add, right? And things of like, hey, I saw this interaction you had with somebody. That was great. It'd be better if you did this, right? And so we're actually developing people. And kind of one of the things I love, like one of the big celebrations I have, is we've been able to hire these people who have disabilities that society has all but written off. Right now, we'll send them a disability check. They're good. Just let them sit at home. That's fine. We brought them in, made them a part of the team. And now I have them leading committees. I have them as lead workers, and people in positions of authority. And everyone has benefited from that. And it's because Star Trek in a real way showed me that when you just look at the person and see what's on the surface, you're seeing 5% of the package, right? Like, there's so much more there. And when you can create an environment that's just welcoming, I've said it a couple of times, but it just bears repeating. When you create an environment that is welcoming and that people want to be in when they wake up, and even if they're like, I don't want to do my work today, but I'm excited to go see these people and contribute to this greater vision or mission that we're working towards, John, that's like it's a superpower. And it absolutely is blows my mind when I see organizations who publish their diversity metrics. And it's like, great. Do people feel like they want it? Do they feel wanted there, or did you just hire them? Are you turning and churning all day long? Or are you actually like unlocking potential? Show me your bottom line, right? Show me your retention numbers. Show me those things. Who's sticking around? When you can build all that, like, gosh, management just becomes almost a joke, because you're like, yeah, they're good. They got it figured out. They don't need me anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I talk to so many leaders, as I'm sure you do, that they just feel like they don't have time for this stuff because they're just spending so much time running around like a chicken with their head cut off, putting out fires all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to reiterate the points that you just made. Like, if you focus on this, it makes your job easier.
So much easier.
like in the short run, it takes a little, it's hard because you're like simultaneously putting out fires while trying to lay the groundwork, right? But if you do that work, you lay that groundwork and that foundation, you create accountability and trust and a culture of belonging within
Mm-hmm.
your organization. So many of the petty little things that you have to deal with just go away,
They're gone.
or they become much easier to deal with, and you just spend way less time focusing on those sorts of things and way more time focusing on what actually matters, all the strategy, the innovation, the relationships, all those sorts of things. So absolutely, I completely agree. Let's, as we start, if we're embedded in an organization that's kind of a toxic culture and we just feel like we're constantly running around putting out fires, okay, we probably can't switch overnight because we probably don't have enough bandwidth to do that. But let's start slowly to shift.
Mm-hmm.
Start to dedicate, X number of hours a week towards this sort of work. And pretty soon you can start to dedicate more time, and then at some point you're going to be able to flip
Mm-hmm.
to the point where more, the majority of your time is focused on this sort of work, and a minority of your time is focused on the fire putting out stuff. And then over time it'll get better and better and better. That's what I've seen consistently in my own work experience and my work with other organizations.
Yeah, if you can pick one thing or give yourself one little chunk of time and do that repeatedly, I don't know, in my experience, you'll start seeing changes. It might take like 6 months, right? It might take a year, but it does happen, and you'll see them start to happen. For me, my aha came 8 months in, when all of a sudden I literally had 16 people too many. Like, I didn't have work for 16 people. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, my head count is this. How can I not have, are you not doing the work? Oh no, our metrics are just rocking. Like, what? And so then my job's changed from managing all these little fires to, hey, how do I help these people promote and find other opportunities? Because frankly, I don't need this many people anymore.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, this has just been a super fun conversation. We've only scratched the surface. I think there's tons more we could talk about. Of course, I think the principles from Star Trek are endless, but that's why you have a podcast. So I
Exactly.
would direct anyone listening, anyone in the audience today, to go check out Jeff, check out his podcast. Jeff, before we wrap things up, tell us again where we can find that. How can people connect with you? And then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Best place to find me is on my website. That's pretty easy to remember, starfleetleadership.academy. Head there. You can get the podcast. I've got blogs. I've got all the good stuff that you need. I'm also on the social media at Jeff T. Akin. It's Akin. And the podcast is available anywhere you get podcasts. Pretty easy to find. Just look it up. And I think my final word on this is Star Trek paints a picture, like it shows us the possibility of a better future. And my belief is that we can get there. Like, it's achievable. It took them hundreds of years, to get there from where we are now. It might take us that long too, but to get there, we need better leaders. The leaders of today are not going to be the leaders that move us to tomorrow unless we get better. And I think people like you, John, people like me through the Starfleet Leadership Academy, we're working to create that for people, create those leaders who can take us to that idealized future where inclusion is just part of what we do and who we are, where we support each other in everything that we do. So I appreciate the work that you're doing very much. And I look forward to connecting with some of your listeners through my podcast, Starfleet Leadership Academy, as we help people develop the future that Star Trek shows us is possible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage my audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Jeff can do for you. Check out his podcast. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great